Have you ever realized your life was coming apart because of one small detail, like a porch light left dark before dawn? Have you ever stepped into your own home and known, before seeing anyone, that something inside it no longer belonged to you? The morning my marriage ended did not begin with shouting, it began with darkness. My name is Lauren Carter. I was 34, a pediatric nurse at St. Andrew Children's Hospital in Indianapolis, and I had worked night shifts long enough to measure life by hospital corridors, burnt coffee, and the relief of driving home at dawn to my family. Daniel, my husband, always left the porch light on for me. When I texted from the staff lot, he started the coffee before I turned onto our street. Our son Owen was 5, and no matter how tired I was, I always checked on him first. That was my ritual. That was how I told myself my life was still whole. That morning the neighborhood was silent, the sky gray, and mist clung to my windshield. The porch light was off, the garage door was half open. I told myself the bulb had burned out. I wanted a harmless explanation before I even stepped inside. But the moment I opened the front door, the air felt wrong. The living room was scattered with takeout boxes, cheap plastic cups, and the stale smell of wine, mixed with a perfume that was not mine. One of our family photos had been turned face down on the shelf. By the door sat a pair of nude heels I recognized instantly, Sophie's. I did not call out. I just walked faster down the hall toward Owen's room, feeling cold pressure build behind my ribs. His bed was empty. I still did not scream. Nurses learn how to move through panic without letting it take the wheel. I went straight to the kitchen, and there he was, curled up under the table on the hard tile floor, using his little hoodie as a pillow, his stuffed rabbit pressed to his chest. His hands were cold when I touched him. "Mom," he whispered. I lifted him into my arms, and that was the first wound. Not betrayal, not yet. It was the sight of my child left there alone, forgotten, cold. Then, with Owen against my shoulder, I saw the thin line of light glowing beneath the guest room door at the end of the hall, and I knew something in my life had already broken. I just had not opened the door yet. The strangest thing about devastation is that it does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes so quietly that all you can hear is your own breathing. I carried Owen back to his room, tucked the blanket around his small body, pressed the stuffed rabbit against his chest, and waited until his breathing deepened again. Then I walked down the hall toward the guest room, feeling the cold tile under my feet, the pulse hammering in my throat, the whole house holding its breath with me. When I opened the door, Daniel and Sophie were asleep in the same bed. A lamp on the nightstand cast a dull yellow glow across the room. There was a half-empty wine glass, Daniel's phone turned face down, and my cardigan hanging over the chair like someone had reached into my life and decided every boundary in it was optional. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I just stood there and looked. Daniel, the man who had once held my hand in the delivery room and whispered, "You're the strongest woman I know." Sophie, my little sister, the one I had covered for, defended, helped, and protected for so many years that it had become second nature. I closed the door without a sound. Then I went into the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and called Rebecca Hale. I had hired her 8 months earlier, when money first started disappearing from our joint account. At first it was small enough to explain away, $40, $90, a few hundred here and there. Daniel always had an answer, and I always chose the answer that hurt me less. Just a week earlier, Owen's preschool app had flagged a failed payment for summer enrollment. I told myself it was a banking glitch. Rebecca picked up on the second ring. I said, "I found them, in my house." Owen was sleeping on the kitchen floor. There was a pause, then her voice turned sharp and steady. "Do not wake them. Do not confront either of them. Take your son and leave. Before you go, photograph everything." Something inside me shifted then. I stopped being shocked and became precise. I got Owen's charger, medicine, an extra sweatshirt, his rabbit, his medical folder. Then I went back and took photographs from the doorway, the bed, the glasses, Sophie's shoes, her bracelet on the nightstand, the rumpled sheets. On my way to the kitchen, I opened a drawer for Owen's crayons and found an unopened envelope reminding us about his summer tuition balance, shoved in beside junk mail, like his future was just one more thing someone meant to deal with later. I carried him out to the car while he slept against my shoulder, checked into Fairview Suites under my business name, and sat on the edge of that cold hotel bed, knowing the next blow would not come from what I had seen in that room, but from what Rebecca was about to show me in numbers. The next blow did come in numbers, and somehow that made it colder. Rebecca called while Owen was still asleep under the hotel comforter, one hand curled around his rabbit, and her voice had that careful, deliberate tone people use when the truth is bad enough that they do not want to waste a single word. She told me the forensic accountant had finished tracing the transfers. Over 15 months, Daniel had moved $66,400 out of our joint accounts and Owen's college fund. Some of it went to a credit card in his name I had never seen. Some of it had been withdrawn in cash, and $18,300 had gone to Birch Hollow Apartments to a lease in Sophie's name, along with furniture charges for a sofa, a mattress, a table, dishes, the ordinary pieces of a life they had been building while I was working nights and trusting them both. I remember staring at the blackout curtains while Rebecca spoke, feeling like the room had lost its air. Infidelity was one kind of betrayal, this was another. This was stealing from a child to furnish a lie. Maybe that was why it hurt in such a strange, breathless way. I had spent most of my life taking care of Sophie. When our mother drifted in and out of her own storms, I was the one making breakfast, checking homework, finding bus money, telling my little sister everything would be okay even when I had no idea if it would. And when I grew up, that pattern just changed clothes. I paid phone bills, helped with rent, covered an urgent clinic visit once when she had no insurance, talked her through breakups, job losses, overdue notices. So yes, finding her in my guest room was brutal, but learning she had been living inside a future, paid for by Owen's name, was the thing that broke whatever was left between us. Then Owen woke up and asked, "Where's Dad?" I turned toward him with a smile I did not feel, and told him we were on a little mom and son adventure. He thought the hotel was exciting. He thought room service pancakes were the greatest idea in the world. He sat cross-legged on the bed, drowning them in syrup, talking to his rabbit in a tiny, serious voice, while I sat there with my phone in one hand and the remains of my marriage in the other. That was the moment something inside me went still, not empty, clear. Rebecca filed the divorce papers that morning. Daniel called again and again. Sophie did too. I did not answer either of them. Instead, I called my mother because she deserved to hear it from me first, or at least I thought she did. When I told her what had happened, she went quiet, then said Sophie had mentioned things had been difficult between Daniel and me. That pause told me more than her words did. She had known something, or suspected enough to matter, and chosen silence. By the time Daniel called for the 13th time 2 days later, I was no longer picking up to save anything. I was picking up to hear how a man explains himself when the truth has finally run out of room. What I heard on that 13th call told me more about Daniel than 7 years of marriage ever had. The most frightening thing about people after they are caught is not the lie itself. It is the way they start rearranging the story, piece by piece, until your pain sounds like their wound and your betrayal sounds like your failure. His voice was rough, tired, almost practiced. He said he was sorry. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said Sophie had come to him when she was desperate and had nowhere to go, and one bad decision had turned into something neither of them knew how to stop. Then, slowly, almost carefully, he shifted the blame toward me. He said I was always working, always exhausted, always taking care of everyone else. He said somewhere along the way I had stopped being his wife and become only a nurse and a mother. Then he said the line I think he believed would make him sound human. "I never meant to hurt you, Lauren. I was just lonely." I let him talk. I let every excuse run dry on its own. And when he finally stopped, I said, very quietly, "I found our son asleep on the kitchen floor. He was cold. Daniel, you were in the next room." There was silence after that, the kind that has no defense left in it. He tried once, weakly, to say Owen must have wandered out on his own, that he had only closed his eyes for a little while, that it was not what it looked like. I said, "Rebecca will be in touch," and I ended the call. A minute later, he sent a text that read, "Don't turn this into a war. Think about Owen." I stared at that message for a long time, because even then, even after all of it, he was still trying to use our son as a shield. I took a screenshot and sent it to Rebecca. On the third day, Sophie came to the hotel. Rebecca had told me not to engage, and I fully intended to listen right up until I heard the knock. Before I opened the door, I turned on the voice recorder on my phone and slipped it into my pocket. Sophie stood there in the coat I had given her for Christmas 2 years earlier. Her hair was unwashed, her mascara streaked, and for one dangerous second she looked so familiar, so heartbreakingly familiar, that I almost saw the little sister I used to protect. She started crying before I said a word. She told me Daniel had said my marriage was basically over already. She said none of this had been planned, that it had just happened. I did not argue. I asked her about the $18,300. I asked when she signed the lease at Birch Hollow. I asked who paid the first deposit. She froze. When I told her that money came from Owen's college fund, she covered her mouth and cried harder. But even then, she never asked about him, not once. Not whether he was scared or sick or sleeping or safe. Standing there in that hotel doorway, I understood something I could never unknow. Some people cry because they are sorry. Some cry because the consequences have finally reached them. I thanked her for coming, closed the door, and sent the recording to Rebecca that night. From that point on, this was no longer just heartbreak. It was documentation, bank records, court dates, and the long, exhausting work of taking back what was left of our lives. From that point on, this was no longer just heartbreak. It was paperwork, bank statements, custody evaluations, and the slow machinery of family court grinding through the wreckage of what used to be my life. Real endings do not happen in a single dramatic day. They happen over months, in conference rooms with bad lighting, in lawyers' offices that smell like coffee and toner, in the quiet exhaustion of signing your name again and again while trying not to think about the home you once believed was safe. The divorce took 8 months. Daniel hired an attorney and tried to challenge the financial findings. He tried to suggest that because I had worked night shifts for so long, I was not the more stable parent. Rebecca dismantled that argument piece by piece. She had the forensic report, the transfer history, the recording from my hotel room door, and documentation from the hospital showing I had always been the steady one in Owen's life. Owen's therapist also confirmed what I already knew in my bones, that my son needed consistency, calm, and a home where he did not have to guess whether the adults around him were paying attention. In the end, I kept the house. I was granted primary custody of Owen. Daniel received supervised visitation on a fixed schedule, and the court ordered financial restitution for the money taken from our accounts and from Owen's education fund. It would be repaid over time, not all at once, but it was binding. Sophie lost the apartment at Birch Hollow because she could no longer afford it, and she moved back in with our mother. No one went to jail. Life is rarely that clean. But consequences came anyway, Heavy enough that nobody could pretend this had all been a misunderstanding. Sophie left voicemails in the weeks that followed. She cried, she apologized. But even then, it sounded like she was mourning the collapse of her own life, more than the damage she had done to mine. I never called back. My mother called more often too, and eventually I agreed to meet her for coffee. We did not have some perfect reconciliation. We did not cry and become new people in an afternoon. But for the first time in years, we were honest. And sometimes honesty is the closest thing to peace a family can manage. Owen started sleeping better after a while. The nightmares came less often. He stopped startling awake at every sound. I moved to day shift, and little by little, our life began to feel like something built, instead of something barely survived. One afternoon, I came home and found Owen in the backyard, drawing huge birds across the patio with sidewalk chalk. He held up a blue piece and said, "Mom, draw one that's flying." So I did. I drew wings stretched wide across 3 stones, heading somewhere open. I do not believe pain is a gift, and I will never pretend betrayal made me lucky. But I know who I am now. I know what I will protect. And every night, before I lock the front door, I turn the porch light on myself, not because I am waiting for someone to come back, but because my son and I deserve to come home to something steady, warm, and still standing.